Hi everyone, my name is Neshunna Jones, and this is my presentation for the macro project. I'd like to start off by discussing the social issues my project is created to address. So the issue that my macro project addresses begins with disparities created by the wealth gap. There are two cycles happening on both sides of the wealth scale. So the rich enter the cycle of wealth through investment and tax breaks, while incarcerated individuals enter the cycle of poverty and recidivism through generational trauma and the lack of support. So between 1979 and 2007, the richest percent in the 1% in the United States nearly quadrupled their income, while during almost the same period of time, the prison population grew 6.5 times as large. So upon release, formerly incarcerated people are faced with the harsh transition, moving back to life outside of prison. As Michelle Alexander put it, the genius of current caste system and what most distinguishes it from its predecessors, is that it appears voluntary. People choose to commit crimes, and that's why they are locked up and locked out. We are told. So, however, the data shows that formerly incarcerated people are faced with less opportunities in employment, housing, and education. This is basis on the most recidivism. This lack of support that a formerly incarcerated person receives forces them to make decisions on basis on survival. This example of rational choice theory is a fallacy because it fails to consider these external factors impacting a formerly incarcerated person's decision making. For a parent, this is especially true because they have more than just themselves to look after. They also have their children. So this is how trauma perpetuates itself through generations of the same family. A formerly incarcerated parent is faced with less opportunity, which bars them from nicer communities and higher funding of education and infrastructure. This lack of opportunity and wealth will ultimately impact their children along with the trauma of their parents' absence. This impact will show itself as a greater risk for depression, substance abuse, and even incarceration. At the same time, their parents will also be battling with these same risks, creating a toxic and never-ending cycle. This feeds into the prison industrial complex that continues the cycles mentioned previously, where those profiting off of prisons gain more wealth while the prison population grows. So the Parental Intervention Project is intended to break this cycle of incarceration and poverty. They're doing this by offering parenting education, trauma recovery, counseling, and case management. The program aims to heal both the parents as well as the children before their release. This way, upon release, they are more prepared for the transition to outside world to provide training for MSW interns. I've been selected for this internship and will begin working with this project in May or June. I'm very excited because it's a mission that is aligned with the whole reason that I wanted to become a social worker in the first place. I would like to support Parent Intervention Project in their mission by establishing a peer network with justice-involved parents across the nation, rather than just in San Bernardino County. There are already a group session with jails, but I believe by branching out across nations, parents will feel more accepted and they will reject the labels that stigmatize them. This example of labeling theory is a fallacy because it labels these justice-involved parents as delinquents, so they must be terrible caregivers to their children. This one only serves to harm the parents by focusing on their past decisions rather than looking ahead at their future as parents. So by introducing a social learning opportunity, they can build their future. A social environment provides validation and motivation for a parent to be better for their children. It also can open doors to different perspectives and parenting tactics that may have never even been considered before. So for my project, I wanted to dive in and
do you believe that
conduct some interviews for people that I know personally. So the first one I started off, I will go ahead and play the video. I asked them all the same questions, and these are their answers.
Definitely. I feel like if there was a more like parents in the justice system, such as like visitation and counseling, the people who are justice involved, do you think that there would be a better relationship with their children? Would there be a better relationship if they did have that organization available to where they're able to do visitation and counseling in order to be a better parent?
I do think that it's opportunity there in that challenge. The visitation piece is a little different. I remember when I took my children to visit their father and you're not dressed appropriately, that can cause trauma because then you have to go and put in something else, or you suffer from not being able to see your loved one. So the visitation is a alternative, but it's not all-inclusive. I think that additional counseling or things that follows up to be able to trying not to be emotional, be able to connect those families in a better light, even though their parent got into trouble. I think that it would be a great opportunity to spend a better visitation.
I don't like how they're so strict on phone calls and visitation, and how you can only go this amount of times or call for this long time. Like if you're a parent and you have a kid and you're behind bars, you would want to speak to them as long as possible, as much as possible, see them as much as possible, especially because you're not seeing them in person, especially through a phone call or visitations. Like how they can't really touch, they can't hug, they can't really, that I feel like that in general, like if we had better systems or better rules or whatever you want to say, like in place for parents, especially with children, that it would help. Like, because when I would go and see my mom, like I couldn't touch my mom. I couldn't, hug her at all. She was behind a plexiglass, and then everything was timed. Like you can only be here for this amount of time. You can only talk for this amount of time. And when she would call, it was just like, you had to put money on the phone, and not everybody got money to always be putting on phones, be talking to their parents. Like, I feel like, man, if you trying to talk to your parents and you ain't got money on your books, like, or they phone calls, like, that's fucked up as a kid because you don't really understand, like, why can't I talk to my mom, Especially as a young kid.
Yeah, it takes away from that connection.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so basically,
if my father did have if he did serve his time and had a way to, still be in this country after serving his time, as long as I was able to communicate with him and see and know where he's at all places, that would have definitely helped because of how, pretty much because of them telling him that he had to leave the country. It was years until I made contact with my father because we didn't know where he was at.
Right.
And there was resources in jail, at least, I would be able to call him whenever I was able to, or visit him whenever they had visitations. And at least I wouldn't have severely lose my relationship with my father.
So after conducting these interviews, I noticed a reoccurring theme within them, which is the lack of bond and partnership that these individuals had with their parents or their children. And not only that, just like we discussed before, that cycle of poverty of not being able, having that one parent gone and not being able to provide for your children because of that one income being out of the picture.
My father did.
So a team of researchers used a method of group therapy known as a psychoeducation group or PEG treatment program. This treatment consisted of a 10 weekly 2-hour session per group. These groups were based upon dual diagnoses such as depression and alcohol use disorder or bipolar disorder and alcohol use disorder. As one participant described the group therapy, the group was the only therapy which supported my needs because it helped me feel normal and I was able to speak out with a voice. I would like to construct our group much like this PEG treatment program, with the integration of the criminal justice factor. For example, some groups could be constructed around the duality of substance abuse and incarceration, or depression and incarceration. By gathering parents based upon their trauma, groups can heal collectively together. When parents heal from their underlying trauma, their children will be less likely have exposure to trauma stemming from a parent who is addicted to substance or struggling with depression. By lowering these risks of trauma for children and helping parents live a better life, this cycle of generational trauma can essentially end. So the framework of this group therapy already exists within the Parental Intervention Project, because that is their main treatment. They gather justice-involved parents with their children in order to benefit the parents collectively. This should hold true when introducing the existing community to other justice-involved parents across the nation. By using the existing case management, the program will be able to gather a pool of parents who would benefit from this peer network. Once the pool is built and any necessary documentation is completed, social workers and MSW interns from the program can reach out to the jails as well as the prisons to find justice-involved parents with similar situations. Much like the PEG treatment program, groups should be limited to around 12 participants in order to allow the participants to engage effectively with each other. It should be composed of parents from each jail system distributed evenly as well, in order to provide a diversified experience. So for example, if there were 12 participants and 4 jails participating, 3 parents from each of those jails would become a member of the group. So workshops will be provided as well in order to assist the treatment and the transition to the life outside of jail. As a peer network program is taking place, the social workers will work with the MSW interns to evaluate parents' progress and utilization of anything that they've learned in their group sessions. In order to ensure that the peer network lasts for a lifetime, we would need to begin by assembling our planning team. So this team would need to be composed of key stakeholders that represent different levels of the program in order to provide a clear and effective discussion. In this case, that would start with social workers as well as the MSW interns to represent the members of the program who interact with the justice-involved individuals. And during every session, and it would be necessary to involve representatives from the San Bernardino County Jail in order to provide perspectives of project feasibility and implementation. Once this planning team is assembled, the first step would be determine the different outcomes we would like to achieve from short to long term. Our short-term goal would be to continue the group sessions with our justice-involved parents and monitor their progress. This would ensure that they will be achieving our main goal and would be healing to the parents in the program as well as the children from the trauma induced by the justice system and their transition back to their life after release. Our medium-term goal would be to continue growing the peer network in order to keep the program ongoing. Justice-involved parents will eventually be released with success, with transition back to the outside of jail. Would they say that their skills as parents were enhanced by our program? Were they more prepared to join the workforce again in order to provide for their family? Do they still keep in contact with the people that they grew in those relationships with in that program? So those are the questions that we would ask after years of release to see the effectiveness of the network. And because that is ultimately that's the success of the long-term goal. In order to achieve this, the planning team would write up an action plan, which would ultimately be approved by the Parent Intervention Project leadership. This plan would outline special considerations for any decision before it's made. It would give priority to different matters that require intervention as well, along with the ranking by priority that any members of the peer, prior that the action plan would also describe specific steps to action. There'd be a list of resources and methods for tracking success. Ultimately, the goal of action plan would be to ensure that any members of the the peer network team know exactly how to handle every situation in order to sustain it in the future. To begin, to make sure that the program is still sustainable, it would be necessary for the team to review the action plan and ask any questions involving sustainability annually. With the inclusion of new members in the program and new scenarios, the original action plan might be lacking in any certain areas. So that is the end of my presentation, and these are the references that I used listed here. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and shoot me an email at neshunnaj@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. Bye.